I kind of stopped the conversation and said, if 10 years down the road, this will have been done. We know now, we have the science, we have the math, and we've been working on that science and math for some time. We know now that this is physiologically possible, or we hypothesize that it's physiologically possible, and all it's going to take is somebody, some organization, some person, some company to put in the resources to really go after it, and just with blinders on, go after this problem.
That was Dr. Brad Wilkins today on the Running Effect podcast. Today's conversation is a deep dive into the world of sports science. Dr. Brad Wilkins is a doctor at the University of Oregon. He currently serves as an assistant professor in the Department of Human Physiology at the University of Oregon. He is the director of the Oregon Performance Research Laboratory, and his research focuses on the physiological limits of human performance. Dr. Wilkins had a large hand in the Breaking2 project years ago that Nike put on, as 3 athletes, including Eliud Kipchoge, tried to break the 2-minute marathon barrier for the first time. That is a lot of our conversation today, what it was like to be a part of that project, behind the scenes of it, testing in the lab. And we also dive into, particularly at the end of this conversation, some things that you guys can do today from a testing perspective without going into a lab that will ultimately help improve your running and make you faster. We also touch in the middle portion, Dr. Wilkins' story, how he got into his profession and how he views his work, process over outcomes, a lot of interesting things around that. I love this conversation. I so appreciate Dr. Wilkins taking the time to chat with me, enlighten me on the areas of sports science. And if you guys enjoy this one, share it with a friend, a family member, a teammate, someone who you think would find value and benefit from it. Make sure you are following or subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen so you never miss another episode. And give us a 5-star review. It takes 5 seconds to do and greatly helps us out. And without further ado, enjoy this conversation with the ever so wise and insightful Dr. Brad Wilkins. Dr. Brad Wilkins, welcome to the Running Effect podcast. A privilege and pleasure to say those words. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well, Dominic. Thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
So many things to dive in, so many things that we could discuss, but I think a good starting point and starting question from myself to you is, who are you and what would you say your work is? What would you describe what you do and what your mission and purpose in life is?
Yeah, that's a great question. My name is Dr. Brad Wilkins, and I'm a research scientist at the University of Oregon. I'm an assistant professor here, and I direct the Oregon Performance Research Laboratory. The goal or mission of our laboratory is to discern the physiological limits of performance and apply that to increasing or enhancing human potential. And so that's really, we came up with that mission because that's what my passion is to understand and really get down to what is it that limits human potential and human performance. So that's really the questions that we go after at a high level, and a lot of specific questions that we do from a research standpoint. But generally, what are the physiological limits to human performance? Those are the questions that we pursue.
Off of that, very simple yet I'm sure nuanced answer in response to my question: what does limit human performance?
I wish I knew. If I knew that, I wouldn't have a job. I wouldn't have to research these things. It often depends on the context. And I tell my students and I tell, lab members that we have to define the context of what it is that we are looking for from a performance outcome, right? If it's a 5K, 10K marathon, those are very different things. And how the environment or how energy or how pace or whatever might limit performance is very different in those types of events. So you have to define what performance is first, and then you can understand what actually limits that performance.
Let's go back some time and give context to, in my opinion, one of the coolest things that you've worked on in your tenure. Take me through the phone call, the meeting, the email, whatever you got describing the Breaking2 project and the process of joining that team.
Actually, it wasn't just one phone call or one email or one conversation. It was a long time and a lot of discussions around, hey, what is this possible? What would we do if we were to go after or pursue this seemingly unbreakable barrier? How would we go about it? And honestly, it was 5-6 years of conversation. We'd have conversations and then it would kind of die for a little bit, and then we'd have conversations and then it would die. But there was one meeting in particular that was, I think, a seminal meeting where I was invited to come, and talk with leaders within the Sport Research Lab, leaders within Nike. That meeting was run by a man by the name of Sandy Bodecker, who was really the champion of the project from Nike's perspective, a very well-respected leader. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but a very respected leader at Nike, and he was leading that meeting. And the discussion was like, how would we go about this? Or, is this even possible? And the time frame that was being talked about was like, well, in 10 years, maybe this is possible. And I kind of stopped the conversation and said, if 10 years down the road, this will have been done. We know now, we have the science, we have the math, and we've been working on that science and math for some time. We know now that this is physiologically possible, or we hypothesize that it's physiologically possible, and all it's going to take is somebody, some organization, some person, some company to put in the resources to really go after it, and just with blinders on, go after this problem. And that's going to happen, and it's going to happen before 10 years from now. So, do you guys want to do this or not? And that was kind of the pivotal moment where, I got some pushback, like, well, but as soon as I convinced them, like, here's the math, like, we can do this, then it kind of started snowballing from there, and that was a pivotal moment. And the pieces, led by Sandy, led by myself on the science team, and led by some other footwear developers and other scientists within the footwear team, just kind of all the pieces fell together in honestly quite a unique way that allowed that to progress into what it ended up being.
From the moment that conversation took place, where I was like, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to full steam ahead on this project, on this mission, from that date and that moment to race day, roughly how long was that process? And after that kind of, yes, we're going to do this, what were some of the next steps for you and the team to, really get to work?
Yeah, that process was at least 3 years, if not a little bit more. It was at least 2 years after that meeting, and I'm remembering it was probably a little bit longer than that. So I'm right around that 3-year time frame that we really started putting all the pieces together. We got some initial. It came in pieces. We got some initial go ahead. Okay, go. Let's go engage with some partners. And I went, and Dr. Brett Kirby, who's still at Nike, he and I went to Dr. Andy Jones, or Professor Andy Jones. And went to Dr. Phil Skiba, because we knew that they had been thinking about these kinds of questions for a while, and we kind of started to talk to them about potentially being on the team. And then we got some more go ahead to let's go and start doing some initial testing on some of the potential athletes that could be capable of doing this. So one of the things that we wanted to understand is, we needed to find the right individual, the right athlete who had the right physiology to be able to go after this. So that requires us to know what their physiology is. So the first step in all of this is, let's do some testing to try to understand what these athletes' physiology really is. And so we started testing. I think we ended up with 18 or so participants that we published that paper in our performance of a sub 2 hour marathon paper. And with all that testing of what's the physiological demand of a 2 hour marathon, and what characteristics does a human require to be able to do this. And so that was the next step, was, all right, now we need to go find these athletes, right? And then we found a few that we think were physiologically capable of doing that at the time. And then we started talking to those athletes and management teams and things like that to engage them in being a part of this project. And then I think the world found out about a year before we actually did it, or maybe a little under a year. But we had been working on it for quite some time before that. So I tell people it was 4 years out of my life, and the world only knew about one of those years. It waxed and waned as to how much time I spent engaged in that project over that 4 years, but definitely 2 years of a lot of work to get that thing done. Um, and then I think the rest, through that year was documented quite well in the documentary that National Geographic ended up producing. So that's about the timeline into leading up into the documentary, and then, like I said, the rest has been documented pretty well.
To one of the points you just mentioned, which is kind of like that 4-year time span. I'm so curious, like for you, and you might be in the midst of something right now that you can't talk about. You and your work specifically in regards to like Nike, is it ever hard because you pour your life into your work and it's your passion? And obviously 4 years is no short amount of time. I'm assuming they have you under NDAs or you can't talk about things can't get leaked. Was that ever hard for you in the midst of some of those middle years where you didn't even know if this would transpire, to not tell people in your life or share about the behind the scenes work?
Um, it never really dawned on me. For me, it's all about the work. It's always been all about the work. It wasn't about where I worked. Although I respect and care for everybody at Nike that I engaged with there in my time. Um, but it was all about trying to get this work done. And you're right, it did come in pieces. Like we hit this benchmark, and then we hit this benchmark, and then we hit this benchmark, and so it was always just okay. What do we need to accomplish? What work? What do we need to learn? What's the strategy forward for each of these benchmarks that we hit? So as long as I just always kind of stayed focused on this is the work that we're doing, then it wasn't all that hard to be outside of that. And um, it may sound cliche, but a lot of the publicity around it almost became white noise to some degree because we focused on the work, and that was what was great about that team.
Going back to another thing you mentioned, you said like the tests multiple times. You first started with a group of 18 athletes. What were those tests, and how did
Yeah.
you analyze and figure out if one of those 18, or in this case, three of those 18, were even possibly capable of running 1:59:59?
Yeah, so there's three things that are highly predictive of performance in a marathon. The first thing is maximum capacity to exercise. We call it VO2 max, or what is the maximal aerobic capacity. So obviously, you need somebody with a high capacity to exercise because the intensities to run, what is it, 432 or whatever mile pace for 26.2 miles is tremendous, right? So they have to have the capacity. So we can measure that in a VO2 max test on the treadmill. The second thing they have to have is they have to be very economical. So the amount of energy that they require to run at those speeds needs to be low. So they or the oxygen cost or the energetic cost to run at those speeds needs to be very economical. So we looked for the lowest economy of movement, the running economy as possible in those individuals. And the third thing is the capacity or the ability to sustain a very high percentage of their VO2 max. So the intensity that they can sustain for a long period of time needs to be very high. So we call that a critical speed, or the speed that you can sustain without appreciable fatigue for a period of time, a long period of time. So mathematically, if I have those three values, I can calculate quite precisely what somebody's potential for running the marathon is. And so that's what we were looking for in those testing sessions, was these three variables. Now, if you have these three variables work in tandem with each other, right? If you have a really low running economy, meaning you're able to really conserve energy while running at these fast speeds, but you have also maybe a lower VO2 max and a higher sustainable percentage of that VO2 max, you can still do it. So it's the ratio of these things in relationship to each other that is the most important factor in the ability to run that fast for that long.
I'm trying to think back to the documentary, which I watched more than I'd like to admit when it first came out, but it's been a minute. I believe it's something on a treadmill, and you hook them up and all sorts of things with oxygen monitors, whatnot. But how do you actually test these things in a lab? Let's say I flew out to Oregon and you wanted to test me in these three things. What does that process look like?
Yeah, so you come into the lab and we would hook you up to a metabolic analyzer, a VO2 analyzer. It's technically called indirect calorimetry, and so we put a mouthpiece in your mouth or a mask on your face so that we collect all the air that you're breathing out, and so that we can determine what that volume of air is and what the concentration of oxygen and carbon dioxide is in that air. And through some math, we can determine how much oxygen your body is consuming at each workload. And so for the max test, we take you all the way to until you can't go anymore. What is that speed that you can't go anymore? And we take that value at that max speed. That's your VO2 max. For the running economy tests, we put you at different speeds and get you to hit a steady state at those different speeds. And what is that highest speed where we can get that steady state oxygen uptake? And that generally is your running economy. Or what is that lowest? Well, it's the amount of oxygen that you're consuming to run at those speeds, and we want that to be quite low. So, and then that sustainable speed is that what is that speed that you can sustain at a steady state without going towards your maximum value? That's this critical speed value that we're looking at. So it's all about we use that oxygen consumption value as the outcome variable or the metric to be able to identify these three things. It's just a little bit different protocol. Is that a maximum protocol? Is it a steady state protocol? Is it a running economy protocol? So and those can vary depending on what questions that we ask, but that's generally how we would do it. All of it on a treadmill. One thing that's unique about this project is we also took them out to a track, and we hooked them up with a portable oxygen analyzer or a portable metabolic cart, and we had them run 400 meters multiple times at varying speeds to try to understand, okay, does the treadmill data translate to running over ground? And what, and then if we had them go at their max speed for the last 400 meters, did their VO2 bump up or did it not? And those kinds of questions allowed us to understand what is their sustainable speed across ground, and make sure that it was equal to what we were getting, or at least so that we could understand what it was relative to our treadmill data. So that's another unique part of what we did in that testing.
Man, technology is so fascinating, and hearing about some of these tools are absolutely ridiculous. Something I did want to ask you about in regards to the three athletes, I'm sure you know from people coming in your lab or your research, like human beings within the sport of running can vary a large portion of how they train, what types of training they do, whatever it might be. So with Kipchoge, Desisa, Tadese, like, was you and your team or the other team on the Breaking2 project, did you guys have a hand in their training? How did you guys kind of monitor that they were doing the right sorts? Of course, they were doing enough to be fast enough to be in this contention to break 2, but what was that kind of process? Were you hands on, hands off, and what did that look like behind the scenes?
Yeah, so you're right. Like these were elite marathon runners when we got them, right? So they're doing something right. We didn't want to come in and start saying, "Hey, we know what to do." All these things. Like they obviously had coaches that know what to do, and they have been doing a great job. Um, and I want to be really clear about this. Our team, the science team, wanted to build relationships, and we did build relationships with their coaching staff, with those athletes, with the other athletes that were around them, with their management teams. And we spent a lot of time on relationship building because we did not want to come in and say, we know what you should do. We wanted to work with them to solve this problem, which was, can a human run a marathon in under 2 hours? Like it was a very collaborative effort, and we spent a lot of time on engaging in that effort. So from that standpoint, we didn't really jump in and try to monitor and change training and say, oh, you should do this, you should do that. After we had a half marathon test event to see, kind of a check-in to see how those athletes were doing. After that, we had some recommendations and some conversations, again, in a very collaborative way with some coaches about potentially maybe, so-and-so should do this or so-and-so should do that, just to try to move them along a little bit. But for the most part, it was, they were doing really well, and we didn't want to interfere with that, because a lot of times you can't really come in and say, all right, this whole philosophy of training needs to be thrown out. We're going to start over because they're probably going to get worse before they get better, right? So if they even get better. So you know, these coaches have been working with these athletes for a long time and have matched their training specific to how that athlete adapts. And that can be very individual. And so we didn't really want to mess with that. And so, you know, the short answer is that we really didn't engage or I would argue interfere with their training programs all that much. Some suggestions here and there from a collaborative standpoint, but that was about how we approached it.
Kipchoge was definitely well known at that point, but he wasn't the Kipchoge that the listener today knows. And I think the Breaking2 project kind of put him on the radar, not just how he ended up finishing and how fast he ended up running, but also in terms of kind of his documentation. There was more of a spotlight around him. Even his like calm, cool, collected spirit, I think, showed through a lot of the content produced. What was your kind of first introduction to Kipchoge? And at what point did you realize like, this guy's special and the Breaking2 project is probably just the beginning of everything we're about to see?
You know, yeah, I think Eliud is one of the most amazing humans on the planet. Like his air about him, like I do remember the first day I met him when he came to campus and we did some testing with him. The just the vibe and the air around him is peaceful and it's unique and very special. And so even being around him, you can't help but kind of take all that in. And there's, you know, just the way he approaches life it's special. And so, and that is very obvious from the moment that you meet him. And so that transcended and translated throughout the interactions that we had with him throughout that time. And the relationship that he still has with Brett Kirby and with Andy Jones and others is a testament to the relationships that we built during that time. And so, yeah, that he, you know, and then the more you get to know him and the more that you're around him and the more you understand how he approaches training and how he approaches the marathon and how he approaches life as the world has gotten to see since Breaking2 is pretty incredible. And so he's, you know, he was the right person. You know, hindsight tells us that he was the right person to be engaged in this project from the beginning, not just because he got so close and ultimately did it, but because the way he approached it and the way he thinks about it and the way he talks about it and the inspiration that he brought because of the person that he is was made him the right person to be involved.
As someone, probably one of the few individuals on earth who has and will ever test Eliud Kipchoge, what is special about this guy from a human physiology standpoint?
You know, honestly, from a human like he had high numbers. You know, high numbers that should be high and low numbers that should be low. But they weren't mind blowing. They were good. They were special, but they weren't mind blowing. It wasn't like, oh man, this guy's going to blow it out of the water just because we have his data. He had all the right numbers. He fit the model, right? But I think just I think it's a lot more to do with the testament of once he was in and once he decided that he wanted to be a part of this mission, that he was all in, and that allowed for his physiology to come out and allowed for him to tap into what he's capable of doing from a physiological standpoint. I often talk about this, like the you know, one of the things that we did in that project and the main goal that we were trying to do was just remove barriers. So remove environmental barriers, remove technological barriers, remove, you know, mechanical barriers, anything that gets in the way of a human being able to express their true physiology, and for them to do what it is that they can do. Like if it's hot outside, that's going to limit somebody's ability to express their true physiology or their complete physiology. So we tried to remove those barriers, and I think that's what made Eliud special, is that once he was all in, that was allowed to come out, right? If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Appreciate you sharing that. Would you say his X factor, just from hearing interviews with him, watching him speak, would you say his X factor is his mindset? And from your perspective with him or other athletes, is mindset and just mental performance capacity, can you calculate that in any way? Are there any tests you can do? Because obviously physically you ran me through a plethora of tests you do, things you can, but like the
Yeah.
mind is so incalculable. Is there any way to even deduct whether an athlete is like mentally strong or not?
I'm not a sports psychologist, so
Sure.
there's probably a battery of tests that you can get scores on that would be predictive of that, and whether or not somebody is, has this quote unquote X factor in their mindset, right? We do know that having the capacity and the belief that and the motivation that you can do these things is very, very important. And Elliot certainly had that. And without that belief, you're going to be susceptible to all the little things that can limit your physiology, right? So that I think is something that would be nice to try to figure out how to quantify and predict, somebody's ability to have that. And I'm sure that there's some tools that might be able to. But I think, and I tell people this also, is that I believe that the reason that Elliot was able to do it, the second try, was that he not only believed that he could do it, but he absolutely knew that he could do it. Because he had experienced it once. He experienced even though he was off by 25 seconds, he experienced what it feels like to run that fast for that far. And that meant that every day in training, between the first attempt and the second attempt, he was able to push his body to that level, and to with the whatever the intention of that workout is, if but he had that feeling, in his head, right? And he had that experience, and that experience enabled him to push himself harder in training. And if you push yourself harder in training, you adapt to that load, right? So it's a stress adaptation response. That's what training is. So if you're able to push yourself harder, and able to push yourself in the right way, it's not always harder, is not always right, but able to push yourself in the right way, then you have the optimal adaptations to be able to then do it again. And so I believe that was the true reason why he was able to do it the second time, is because he knew he could do it. It wasn't just a belief, and he knew that every day in training, which allowed him to maximize his adaptations to be able to physiologically do it. And so that's kind of how I think about it.
4 years of hard work, dedication, belief in this project. What were the emotions you were feeling in Italy for those 2 hours?
Yeah, quite a few. I still do, but it was a special project for sure. Um, one of the reasons I left Nike, I don't know if anybody knows this. One of the reasons I left Nike was because I felt like that couldn't happen again. So it was a special time.
How nervous were you during those 2 hours?
Very, very, like, it was, people who know me know that I can get a little stressed out sometimes. And that was it was I was ready for it to start. I was ready for it to get going. I had meetings that morning at like 3 a.m. We had meetings around, okay, are all the conditions right? Are we going to go? Are we not going to go? All those kinds of things. And so once we made those decisions, then I was just ready for it to go, and I was ready for it to start. And that, and so that kind of calmed a lot of the nerves. And once we were going, that definitely kind of calmed a lot of the nerves. But yeah, I was ready for it to go, because, like I said, 4 years of your life, you're like, let's do this. And so There actually was a lot less stressful and nerve wracking and anxiety ridden times once it started than leading up to it.
I know you're a humble guy, but I do want to ask you out of curiosity, was it ever hard in that project? Your team do so much work behind the scenes, and I'm sure you got some shout outs and articles or maybe the documentary to some extent, but really the people who get the praise are, it's like Iliad, and he's like one dude who gets all the praise. Was it ever hard for you to not fully, or even currently in other projects, like not fully get your flowers for the hard work you do, or do you find that pretty easy just to be in the shadows?
So I didn't run 26.2 miles in 2 hours and 25 seconds. I didn't run 26.2 miles in 1:59:49, whatever it ended up being. So I don't deserve that. Like, that's the hard part. Um, the team, again, I go back to focusing on the work, and to me, the ultimate expression of my legacy, if you want to call it that, is the work that I do. And so that keeps me, it keeps me humble. It keeps me from worrying about accolades. It keeps, I care more about the accolades that my grad students get than I do myself.
Talking about the work and your focus around that, let's go back in time because I want to give some context and history to how in the world, this guy who's sitting in front of me even got to work with Nike, got to have the kind of genius that you did to be able to help these athletes chase after history. When you think back in time, what was the moment that you feel like you first experienced greatness from yourself in your life that you were aware of, wow, I did something great?
I'm not sure I have. um,
I
I
don't know
don't think
about that. Over humility right now.
I don't think I have. I don't know. That's a really hard question. I knew. I guess again, it's just all about the process, and in the business of science, and in an academic setting, um, there's always somebody smarter. There's always somebody that's doing more. There's always somebody that's um, you know doing things differently. There's always somebody, and I don't and I feel like it's a trap when I start to compare myself to that, um, because it doesn't do me any good. It doesn't allow me to focus on the work like I try to do. And I'm human. I get stuck up in those kind of comparisons. I was just at a conference, American Physiological Society conference in Baltimore, and you look at all the things that all these super smart people are doing from a scientific standpoint, and you do feel inferior at times, and you just got to kind of, okay, take that in and learn from them. I'm a lifelong learner, and learn from the people that are doing what you perceive to be bigger and better things than you, and you get back and you focus on your work, and you try to, like, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to contribute to the world, and 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 that's kind of how I try to approach it. And I think, yes, I can look back at my career, and you can point to things like I postdoc at the Mayo Clinic with Mike Joyner, and I've done these things at Nike, and I've successfully navigated from an industry career back into an academic career, which is relatively rare. And I can point to those things that are examples of success, but 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 I'm not done, and there's things that I want to do here that keep me driving towards that.
The process over outcomes mentality, I want to dig into a little bit more because barring you being just way different as a kid than me or other people I know, as a kid we're obsessed with outcomes. I think that's just how we are raised to care about the outcome because you get praised when you score a goal at the soccer game and you don't get praised when you don't score any goals. So I think we kind of get that mindset fixated over time. For you, how have you gotten to the place where you're focused on the process? Because I think that's something that could be valuable for a lot of people to hear who are
Yeah.
all focused on the outcome.
It's to me, it's a constant reminder, and actually, Breaking2 was a good example of that, because there was a couple of times that I did get caught up, like, oh, we have an interview here, or we have that, right, and it took a little bit, and it took effort to remind myself, like, it's not about that. It's not about the accolades that I get. It's about this work, and can we accomplish this goal that we have, and can we help these three athletes accomplish the goals that they have for themselves. And so but it's a constant process. Like I said, I was just at a conference and I fell back into those traps of oh, I need to get this done, or I need to be at this level, or why am I not at that level. And then you just have to sit back and you remind yourself that the only way you're going to get there is to focus on now and focus on the work, because you're not going to get there if you don't do that, right? Like you have to get back, and you have to get back to productivity. It's the productivity of the work that allows those accolades to ultimately, those are a side effect of being of doing the work that you want to do, right? So great if you get that, but again, that comes from focusing in and not worrying about it and doing the work. And it's a constant. You have to be conscious about doing that, and you have to be intentional about doing that. And like I said, I'm human. There's days that I'm not that way. I would argue more days that I'm not that way than when I am, but there's something that kicks me back into, okay, if I focus on this, then that stuff's gonna fall. That stuff's gonna fall in, and it doesn't matter at the end of the day.
Dr. Wilkins, when you see 2 hours 25 seconds, is it excitement and joy, or is it damn it, where are the 26 seconds?
I knew, because I know the math, I knew that he wasn't going to be able to do it with a little bit of time before that came. So I had a chance for it to sink in. It was like, it was a brief moment of so close, followed by everybody being exceedingly excited about it, and which was great, because it was never by Nike as an organization, by Nike leadership, by the running community, with a few exceptions. It was never thought of as a failure. It was we pushed the line forward, and it was a success because of that.
Flash forward a few years, Eliud does it. Where were you when that happened? And I'm sure you knew it was only a matter of time. What were your gut reactions from that?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I was actually on vacation in Lake Tahoe when that happened. And I think I got a text from Brett Kirby. And I actually didn't, I don't even know if it was televised live. But I got a text from Brett and a text from a couple other people that I know that were intimately involved. And fully, completely excited that happened. And those individuals, they were very thankful of our work to get them there. And so that was appreciative as well.
Did you ever think, or were you ever invited back on round two, or was that something where, I know you took me through a minute ago, Breaking2 happened and it was just like on to bigger and better things, this chapter is closed?
I don't know if there's any better things than what the Breaking2 project was from a teamwork standpoint, from a work standpoint. There are other things, and they can match in their greatness. But I had some folks consult with me and some things like that, and there was some talk about it at some point. But it doesn't matter that it did or did not work out.
Let's talk about the state of the 2 hour marathon from your scientific perspective. When do you think, I'm sure you get asked this all the time, but when will it actually happen in a major?
I don't know. It's quite close, right? 2 hours, 35 seconds. I think is what it is. Unfortunately, the incredible human that ran that race is no longer with us. So it's going to take an incredible human to do it. And the lucky thing is there's a lot of incredible humans out there. I think we need to give individuals the opportunity to be able to go after this, and expand the opportunity of sport, expand the opportunity of marathon, so that individuals who are physiologically capable have the opportunity to go after that. So it's coming down. What I think is really cool too, though, is that, is that if you look at the race times since Breaking2, so it's been 7 years ish. You know, everybody's getting faster. Like Eliud showed that we can run this fast for this long, and now you look at second, third, fourth place, and they're all running faster than the record at the time of Breaking2. There, a lot of people are running under 202 now. Like, so it's it's there. The whole group is moving as one, and that's what is moving down in their times as one. And I think that's what's going to be required for somebody to break it. And we're very, very close, right? So, and it's going to take the right weather, the right place, the right time, with the right athlete, just like Breaking2 was, to be able to do it. But it's obviously very possible.
Personal question: are you a fan of the sport of running, or is it more, just work, scientific, check out, don't follow too much?
I love running. I am a fan of the sport of running. I'm a runner. I run for mental health more than anything these days. But I am a fan. I live in Trackdown, USA. So I'm going to the Twilight meet next weekend. So I am a big fan of the sport of running. I don't necessarily always remember the specific times and all these things, but I definitely I definitely love running. I went to track camp when I was in high school, and I've been a track geek for my entire life. And so it's amazing to be able to play a very small role in contributing to that sport.
Going back to that version of Dr. Wilkins, what point did you realize that you had that scientific kind of like desire and hunger to get into sports science? And at what point did you kind of mix that with the sport of running? Of like, okay, I'm going to combine these two worlds. I'm probably not going to be an Olympian with my own legs, but maybe I can contribute to the future Olympians.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it was early in college, and the story that I like to tell is that I'm a naturally lazy person, so I and some people would argue that's not true, but I was always really good at science, especially biology and physics, and I could almost I wasn't a great student actually because I could kind of do biology and physics without really trying very hard. Excuse me. Um, so I was like, well, I'm good at that, and I love sport. So maybe these are things that I could combine somehow. And I started to find, and honestly, exercise science and sports science was relatively new when I was an undergrad in the early '90s. Not to date myself, but it was a relatively new kind of field ish, and so that finding that area of study and saying like I can actually combine these this thing that I'm pretty good at and this thing that I'm extremely passionate about in sport and make and learn about this. And from that point on, it was you know not too long after that I decided that I'm going to go do a PhD and that I want to understand what it is that allows people to optimize their performance in sport. And so that kind of was the I guess the impetus for it all.
What would you say to someone out there listening who, and real quick aside, I think this is an important conversation in the sport that needs to take place more because I'm in it as well. Like I was probably, doesn't matter how many times I went to your lab, I was never going to be an Olympian, in my opinion. It doesn't matter how hard I worked. I was probably never going to be an Olympian or get a contract from Nike. But there are ways that you can stay within the sport. You took the sports science route. I took the kind of media storytelling route. There are all these sort of amazing, fascinating ways that if you're passionate about the sport of running, you can stay within it. So specifically speaking on your angle for someone out there listening, whether middle school, high school, college, someone who wants to go back to school, who wants to get into some of the things that you've talked about today, where would you recommend or advise them in terms of just like starting on their path?
That's a great question. I think middle school, high school, like talking to your teachers, your biology teachers, your physics teachers. There's a lot of different components to sports science that's not just physiology. Like, so I'm an integrated physiologist. There's biomechanists that study the mechanics and the physics of sport. There's sports psychologists that study the mental aspects of sport. There's those that combine. There's nutritionists. There's a lot of different components to being a part of what it takes for an individual to learn and to be there to optimize their performance. And so starting to have conversations with your teachers, starting to engage with your coaches. Not all coaches have the background of a sports science, especially in middle school and high school. You might not find a lot of that, but maybe they can start pointing you in the right direction. Visit your local university. Scientists love to get knowledge out into the world, and they love to talk to people about it. It's often we're not the best communicators, especially from a world stage standpoint. We're good at communicating with each other, but we do really enjoy talking about this work and talking about what it is that we do, and especially to young people. At heart, we're academics and educators, and so I think that maybe trying to engage with somebody at your university who does some sports science type of work, that could be a way to go too. But then, listening to podcasts. There's a few sports science podcasts out there. There's trying to look at resources that are recommended in those podcasts. Just you have to have an insatiable curiosity to go search for this stuff. Nobody's going to put it in your lap. So you have to want it, and you have to go and be very curious about what you don't know. And that's what I get to do every day. Is I get to set up experiments and ask questions that very few people in the world are even asking. And so that comes from an innate curiosity to understand what it is that we don't know about nature. And so even if it's like, how do I become a sports scientist? It's like, go be curious, figure it out. Like you kind of have to take that initiative yourself, and try to use the resources that you have available to you and find that platform that you can start learning from.
I've loved this conversation, all the twists and turns it's taken. But, before we close out, I want to dive into some of the science. Quick question. I'm sure you would know, but just random aside, when you're talking about VO2 max earlier and that being one of the 3 things that was tested, I don't know if you know Dr. Peter Attia, but he's kind of risen in prominence. And I remember listening to one of his podcasts probably a year back, and he has frequently stated that like increasing your VO2 max and VO2 max growth is directly correlated with like your all cause mortality dropping, and how VO2 max is like one of the biggest markers for health for anyone out there. What's the reason behind that, and why is VO2 max so important? Not just for someone trying to be elite at their stage in running, but also just my dad, who could be, he's probably 56, 57 if he wants to live longer.
Yeah. So just a little math for you. VO2 is equal to your cardiac output, or how much blood your heart can beat every minute. So what's that liters per minute in blood that your heart can beat around your body, multiplied by the difference between your arterial and venous oxygen content. So what that means is how much oxygen can my muscles and my tissues extract from the blood that's circulating around through the body. Okay, so to have a high VO2 max, that means your heart has to be really healthy. Your heart has to be able to pump a large amount of blood through the system, and your muscles and your tissues have to be really healthy. The mitochondria is actually it's a little organelle in your muscle that is finally using that oxygen to produce energy, right? So your muscles and cells have to be super healthy to be able to extract and take that oxygen that's being delivered to them, right? So in aggregate, to have that high VO2, we know that your heart has to be healthy. We know that your tissues have to be healthy. So any kind of clinical issues or any kind of malfunction in either of those, and that VO2 value is going to drop. So that VO2 value being high is highly, highly predictive, as Dr. Attia talks about, for all-cause mortality. Because if you have cancer, you have other things, your tissues aren't good at taking that oxygen in and using it for energy, right? So it's highly, highly predictive because of those two main factors. We also know that your brain's ability to work and your brain's ability to focus and your brain's ability to have the right neurotransmitters at the right areas to not be anxious and not be depressed and all these other things are very responsive to exercise. And so the more you exercise, the more those things are going to be optimal as well. And so it just comes down to what is it that goes into that measure, and the things that go into that measure turns out are super important for all-cause mortality and your lifespan, right? So, and I'm actually quite grateful to Dr. Attia and others for being for having a voice in sharing this information onto the world in the way that they have, because it's gotten, like I said, we're not always good at communicating, and he very much is. And so it's been great to see that now so many more people know about these measures and about exercise because of his advocacy. So I appreciate it.
What would you say to someone out there listening who doesn't have access to, being hooked up in your lab and you're giving them detailed information of how they can improve in running? Like, what are some things that people listening to this conversation can test or directly implement into their running, into their training to get better?
Yeah, there's some pretty simple things. Like, so to get this highest sustainable speed value that I talked about at the beginning, we call it critical speed for runners. You can plot on, so your fastest running time on the x-axis, or time on the x-axis, and the average speed on the y-axis for different races that you've done. So if you've done like a mile or 1,500, you've done like a 5K and a 10K, you can plot that into a curve, okay? And you'll find that line asymptotes or flattens out the longer you go. And that is your critical speed value. So just having, so everybody can do this who has multiple different race times, right? And you can determine what that critical speed value is. And actually you can Google this and it'll show you how to do it. And find what that critical speed value is. And that value is the highest speed that you can sustain for long periods of time. So now when you're setting up your training, if you want to do longer, slow distance days, you have a speed at which you don't want to go over, right? You want to be able to sustain below that. Or if you have your threshold days, your interval days, you know that you have to go above that speed and you have to deplete this, what we call anaerobic capacity, above that speed. So that speed value gives you a very precise, relatively precise measure to be able to then define the speeds that you're going to go train at every day. And that changes. The more you adapt, that speed gets higher and higher and higher that you can sustain, right? So with each race that you do, you can update your curve and you can implement that in your training every day. So that's something that's relatively easy to do. You need, to know how to do Excel, I guess, put some numbers into a spreadsheet. But like I said, if you Google it, there's plenty of resources to show you how to do this, I think. So that's a really simple way as a runner to just kind of get some really important information that can guide your training. And I think it's better than things like heart rate training zones and those kinds of things, because heart rate can be affected by so many things, like how hot it is outside or how stressed you are, how dehydrated you are, how much sleep you got. All that will affect your heart rate, but that speed should be pretty solid. So that's one thing that I like to recommend.
Yeah, off of the heart rate comment there, so you kind of answered it. So maybe in a word or two, with weekend warriors and Instagram run influencers and these hobby joggers out there, with all love and respect in the world, I'm glad you're a part of our sport. But Zone 2 is the rage everywhere. What's your take on Zone 2?
Well, I just gave Peter Attia accolades, so I don't necessarily want to take him away. I don't get it. I think you have to. So my mentor, Mike Joyner, he has this simple line that he's tell people. He says, "Run a lot, sometimes fast." And that's kind of, he breaks that down and say, like, you do your mileage, but you have to do intervals and you have to do these hard things in between. You have to do fartlek training because you need to be able to push these thresholds up. And the only way to do that is to have that high speed training. Now you don't want to put that stress on your joints, because it does put stress on your muscles and joints to be able to run that fast. Like don't go out the door tomorrow and go do 10 intervals at 90% of max. Like I don't want that to happen, but you do have to have that sometimes fast. A few days a week you want to have those, or a couple days a week you want to have those fast days. So spending all your time in zone 2 to increase your performance, I don't think will happen. And I don't think Peter and others that are advocating that are thinking about performance. They're thinking about being able to sustain your livelihood and things like that, which I 100% agree with. But from a performance standpoint, you have to be able to run fast, and so you have to be able to get out of there and have those interval sessions.
I also think you'd agree that, a Peter speaking to 30-year-old, 40-year-olds who are new to exercise, new to some of these subjects, and for him to say train for performance. And by the way, you're going to go out to a track and do some, you and I know, being in the sport, really, really hard things. The odds of them doing just zone 2 simple training over actually doing hard is just, they're not going to do it. Running's hard. Running hard is
Running's hard, and exercise is hard, and I 100% agree with you. And what I do like about zone 2 training, is that anything is better than nothing. Mm-hmm. So if that's what gets people out there and gets them moving and gets them doing something, I'm 100% for it. And it's without going into giving people heart attacks and things like that by having them doing super maximal threshold work, like I love it. Because it does get people out there. From a performance standpoint, you need to go faster.
Another quick topic before wrapping up here: threshold training. That's the rage these days. Double threshold. What are your thoughts on it?
Like I said, I'm a fan of the sport, but I don't always keep up on all the training trends. So I'm a believer in polarized training. So being able, like I said, run a lot, sometimes fast. So you stay in you're doing super threshold, high threshold, above threshold types of things, or you're spending time below threshold and doing your longer days. Spending all your time at threshold, I don't think that that's going to be as beneficial as if you are able to spend time in both of those other areas. So above threshold for a few days a week, some good couple days, 3 days of some really good above threshold training, and then the rest of the time in I wouldn't say zone 2, but below threshold.
I know we're at time here, so I'll have to get you back on because there's so much more I could ask you about. But final serious question for you: for those who have listened to this conversation or inspired by you and your work, what would be the final takeaway message that you want to leave with people today?
I think I go back to just be curious, ask questions, go after things that you are curious about learning, and find a way through, because it won't be easy. You have to have that purpose in mind of, this is what I'm going to go after and this is why, and be curious about how to figure out how to get there, because there's going to be roadblocks at every turn. But yeah, you just have to fight through that and focus on that work, focus on what that is, and don't focus on the recognition that you get for that. That would be my recommendation.
Dr. Wilkins, final question I ask every guest on every single episode: if you had Gordon Ramsay coming over to your house for dinner, what would you choose to make for him?
What do I choose to make for him?
You're in the kitchen cooking for Gordon Ramsay.
I think I would try to do a good tri-tip.
Oh, okay.
Do a good tri-tip steak with some vegetables. I think that would be something. My mom makes a good tri-tip, so I would try to emulate that. But I'm not very good at it, so
say a prayer before you taste it for the first time. Dr. Wilkins, Thank you so much for the conversation today, for being so generous with your time and honestly sharing your experience and wealth of knowledge. And I'll have to get you back on because I think I could talk to you for another 10 hours and just be scratching the surface. So thank you for your gifts to the world. And just real quick story aside, like Breaking2 and watching that documentary, I think I was back in 7th grade, and like it had a fundamental impact on me and my love and passion and dedication for the sport. And knowing that you were behind that, and I'm sure I watched it in the documentary back then, had a pivotal role on my own experience in the sport, which ultimately affects my work today. So you're having ripple effects in the world, and I appreciate all the work and all that you've done for me from afar without me even knowing it.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And thanks for having me on. It's been fun.